Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everyone another minute to finish joining in. We'll start at 8:20. So if you just hang tight with us, we'll start then. Okay, so welcome to Lucid Law's first in a series of financial grief managed workshops. Today, we're going to be discussing your credit score analysis. So the credit score, first of all, is going to be like the basics of our discussion. And if we have time, I'm going to move on to a next level discussion of credit repair and your credit score and how to utilize that for growth and investment potential. So first of all, welcome. And I want to let you know that the most important thing that you should take away from today's workshop is that your credit score does not define you as a human being. As a bankruptcy attorney, the most tragic and difficult thing for me in dealing with people that have to work on credit repair, that have financial difficulties, is that they look at that number on the credit score as a defining number, as something that either says that they are a good or bad person. It's not. It's just a number. And I'm going to prove that to you today by showing you how easy it is to manipulate that number. So just by knowing the right things to do, you can increase your credit score. And obviously that does not change who you are or how you live your life. So it has no effect genuinely on whether or not you're a good or bad person. So please never, ever look at that number and think anything personal by it. So first of all, we want to talk about, what's the right kind of credit report to look at to really understand where you are in terms of your credit worthiness, okay? So you want to pull a comprehensive credit report. And anytime we are doing a credit repair analysis for a client, that is our starting point. Usually we will pull a comprehensive credit report of all three, the big three, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. What does the comprehensive credit report do? So it shows your credit score. Actually, I think I'm going to try sharing my screen. Not the most tech savvy person, so bear with me 1 second on that. But I think it will be helpful for everyone who is on the Zoom. People in person have a worksheet, paper handout, but people on Zoom, I don't think have that. So I'm going to switch to screen share mode. And okay, so we're on slide number 2 right now. And we are looking at the comprehensive credit score. Okay, comprehensive credit report, my apologies. Okay, so what does that do? It identifies your credit score. It reflects the total balance on revolving and installment accounts. And we're going to break that down in a few minutes. We're going to talk about what that means. What is a revolving account versus an installment account and how they respectively affect your overall credit score. And then they break down your debt. And that's, where does the debt come from? Is it student loans, car loans, mortgages, credit cards, medical bills, right? All of these different types of debt have different impacts on your credit score. So how is your credit score calculated? The credit bureaus look at, as you can see on the list, 5 different components, okay? They look at your payment history, they look at the amounts owed, the length of your credit history, new credit, and the credit mix. I'm going to start at the credit mix, okay? Because that's something that I think instinctively people are like, what is that? So your credit mix is simply the different types of debt that you have and the different types of credit that you have available to you. So Are you too heavy on credit card debt? Are you too heavy on, different kinds of revolving debt that, you might want to try to manipulate the weight of each kind so that they're a little bit more well balanced. But that's a tiny piece of the score. So it's not going to be your main focus until a little bit later when you're at a point where those points on your credit score have a more meaningful impact. Now you're going to look at new credit. Okay. One of the things I always hear from my clients is, I'm never going to open another credit card again in my life. I'm done with it. I got into this situation where I had bad debt and I'm never going to let this happen again. Well, if you don't have any credit available to you, and you don't have any debt at all, then you don't have a good credit score. So you're not going to be eligible for lending when you do need it. So new credit kind of just opens up opportunities, okay? You don't want excessive amounts, and you want to, again, it's a balanced approach, right? So new credit is 10% of that weighted number on the credit score. Then you're going to look at the length of credit history. And so you see, it's 15%, right? It is important to try and keep accounts open. Now, once you've gone through a bankruptcy, all of your credit card accounts, medical debt accounts, those are all closed. So you're going to need to reopen and start fresh there. But you can do that, right? So you don't need to worry about the fact that those old credit cards that you had for 15, 20 years got closed down and you lost the value of that component. It rebuilds pretty quickly. You only need, a couple of years. 2 years is basically the benchmark for that to have a meaningful impact on a positive side in terms of length of credit history. The next thing is going to be the amounts owed and then the payment history. Okay, now payment history is pretty simple. So I'm going to jump over to that. What's your payment history? Okay, so it's a very important component of your credit score. It makes up 35% of your credit score. It is clearly the most important factor on your credit score. Okay, so when you look at your payment history, you're going to have to understand that as you are rebuilding and reestablishing your credit and making efforts to increase your credit score, you have to make sure that you are paying your accounts on time. Here's a little trick about what that means. Okay, I get asked this pretty frequently, and consistently and on time payments increase your credit score, but you have to understand what consistent and on time mean and how the different variables can actually affect your credit score. Now, you want to make monthly payments on all your credit cards. You don't want to be late or be in default or miss payments, okay? So that's consistency in one regard. Now, here's the trick. Your bill may not be due until the 15th of the month or the 10th of the month. However, your credit score is generated at the end of every month. So what you want to do is you want to pay by the end of the month when the statement is generated. So if the statement is generated on October 23rd and it's due on November 10th, you don't want to wait until November 9th to pay it. I mean, you can, it's not going to be a huge detriment, but you can get a bump up on your credit score by just making sure that payment gets in before October 31st and thus before the report is closed for that month. So, and then there's the question of how much do you want to pay? When possible, you want to pay the full statement balance. Now, I say that very specifically because oftentimes when I say pay it in full, people think that that means to pay off the full amount that is on the card by the end of each month. And that is not what I'm saying. The statement balance. So let's just say it's revolving credit, right? That's what a credit card is. Credit card is your most basic form of revolving credit. What you want to do is you want to take that credit card and you want to, let's see, if you charged $3,000 in one statement period, that's the closing balance on the statement. But by the time you go to pay it, there's $4,200 charged because you're already into the next statement period. You don't pay the $4,200, you pay the $3,000. The reason for that is that you do want to have a revolving credit balance. That's actually healthy for your credit score. So keep that in mind. It's an easy trick and it'll just keep bumping up your credit score every month that you do that. Okay. Yeah, we have a question from the audience. So that's a great question. I'm really glad that you asked that. If you're making the minimum payments on your credit cards, yes, it keeps you from missing payments. It keeps you from being in default, but it also increases your interest and other fees associated with the credit card. And it's going to be harmful in the next category of what we're going to talk about, which is credit utilization. So I'm going to table that for just a minute, and we're going to talk about it more in a minute. Okay? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. So the question was if with regard to the trick that I was talking about, if your statement is generated on the 23rd, but it's not due until the 10th, paying it before the end of the month helps to boost your credit score. Paying it on time is still fine, and it's not going to hurt your credit score by any means, but it's just not going to do as much to boost your credit score. So if what we're looking at is credit repair and actually increasing your credit score and making you look like a healthier credit risk. And again, this is why it's so important to understand that this number, your credit score, does not define you as a good or bad person, because what does it even mean to know this trick, right? You can increase your credit score by just paying your bill a little bit earlier. That's not an intuitive thing. That's not anything that anybody would really be like raised learning. You pay your bills on time, right? That's what we mostly think. So paying your bill on time, making sure it's in before, you know, before it's past due. So if it's due on the 10th, you pay it by the 9th of the 10th, you're fine. That's not going to hurt. It's also not going to do as much to help. That's the key. That's what we're trying for. You're welcome. Thank you. So the next slide we're going to look at is slide number 5, and that's the amounts owed. Okay, so the amount that you owe on your credit balances makes up 30% of your credit score. It's the second largest component of your credit score. That is the total amount of credit and loans that you are using compared to your total credit limit. Now you see there in parentheses the utilization rate. I'm going to talk about that for just a minute before we move on. Okay. Credit utilization is like the holy grail of a good credit score. Okay. So everybody says, again, like I said before, almost invariably my clients come out of a bankruptcy and they say, I am never getting another credit card. You know, I might need a car in a few years, but you know, I'm just going to keep a clean slate and not have any credit until, you know, the time when I need a car, and maybe I'll even try to save so I can buy the car in cash. Not the best idea, because you can very easily increase your credit worthiness and make yourself eligible for better lending so that you can have better control over how your money is used simply by increasing your credit utilization rate. How do you do that? So increasing your credit utilization is pretty simple, actually. You open some new revolving lines of credit. Open 2 or 3 credit cards. Don't need any more than that, okay? What you're going to do is you're going to use no more than 30% of the available credit on any of those accounts. So if you open a credit card that has a $3,000 credit limit, you're never going to use more than $1,000 on that card. Maybe you're going to try for less because that's a third, right? So it's a little bit high if you use 1,000, but not terrible, right? So, but what you want to do is try to keep it under 30%. And you're going to use that 20 to 30%-ish on a revolving basis. So let's make the numbers a little bit easier. So let's just say you have a $1,000 credit limit, right? 20% is $200. Ideally, you're going to use between $200 and $300 a month, and you're going to pay it off, pay that statement balance off by the 30th or 31st by the end of the month. Okay. You will be astounded at how quickly your credit score goes up by simply maintaining that rule for credit utilization. Now, here's the other thing. You can, every 6 months to a year, depending upon the different credit card company, ask for an increase in your credit limit. Now, people say, oh no, that's how I got in trouble in the first place. But you're going to do this intentionally and carefully. So every time you increase your credit limit, you increase your credit score because you increase your credit utilization rate. So you're going to call them up every 6 months and you're going to say, hi, I've been a really good customer and I've been paying on time, and look how great of a job I'm doing. And so I would like an increase in my credit limit. Most likely they're going to say, sure. Once in a while, they might say, you've asked for a credit increase too many times. It doesn't hurt your credit score. It doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. You just say, okay, thank you, and call back a few months later. And then when they're ready, they will increase your credit limit. And again, the more credit you have available to you, the higher your credit score. So like if I know that I have a credit card, that I have to use between $4,000 and $5,000 a month on it, I'm going to do my very best to get the credit availability on that up to $15,000 to $20,000. I'm never going to use that much credit. And as a matter of fact, I'll just tell you, I was talking to my banker recently about getting some financing on a revolving line of credit for our office, for just office expenses, so that we don't use credit cards for everything. And my banker said, well, we have a minimum of $250,000 on our line of credit for businesses. And he says, but you've been such a great customer for so many years. I'm happy to just work on the paperwork and make it a lower amount, whatever you need. And I said, well, look, I really only need maybe $20,000 or $30,000. But if you want to give me a line of credit for $250,000, I'm fine with that. I don't have to use it. And having that much extra credit available is going to make my business look fantastic the next time I actually do need more credit for whatever investment or next step that we're taking in the process of this business. So bear that in mind. If they're willing to give you more credit, it doesn't mean you have to use it. So, we're rebuilding, we're being responsible, we're being intentional. And so you're not going to get into trouble because I only, in my mind, have $4,000 available on that credit card, even though the credit limit is $15,000. Understanding that math and being very intentional about it is really important. Now, bear in mind the next point. Any usage over 50% of your available credit will lower your credit score. Okay, so when you're working in those parameters, some months you may go over the 30%. That's okay. You want to do your very best to avoid ever going over the 50%, okay, because that will actually hurt you that month. Can you bring it back up? Yes, but it's better to not mess with that. Okay, so keep your credit utilization rate at 30% or below, and you're going to be consistently increasing your credit score. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is those simpler concepts that we briefly went over at the beginning. The length of your credit history, new credit, and your credit mix. Okay, the length of time you've had credit makes up 15% of your score. It pretty much speaks for itself, right? The longer you have credit on a particular account, the better. But again, like I said before, don't lose sight of the fact that 2 years is pretty much a benchmark. So, when they're doing a look back for credit history and length of credit history, 2 years is what they're really looking at as an ideal minimum. So any credit that you have had available to you for 2 years or more is great. You don't need to have a credit card that you've had since college and you're so tied to it. It's fine. Just get new ones and keep them consistent. New credit, whenever you apply for a new revolving account, or that's going to go onto that component of your credit score that will bump it up just a little bit each time. And then, of course, your credit mix, like we said before, that is, the combination of revolving and installment credit products. Yes. So those are great questions. So we just had a question from the in-person audience, and the question is, if you file for bankruptcy, is it okay to apply for like every credit card offer that comes in the mail? And you will get a lot of credit card offers in the mail after you file for bankruptcy. You should not apply to every single one of them. Okay, what you want to do is, again, being very intentional is important. If you get one that looks like it's going to be a good fit for you, maybe it has some kind of rewards that are a particularly good fit. Like I shop at Costco all the time. So the first thing I would want to do would be to see if Costco would give me a credit card, because that's going to be something that I'm going to be able to use almost like I use a debit card, right? I'm going to do my shopping and I'm going to go there twice a month. And I know that, and I know how much I'm going to spend because I have a family food budget. And then I'm going to pay it off by the end of the month, right after I got the statement. So that's going to be my first go-to. And if they say no, then I'm going to look at one that I don't like quite as much, but it'll get me in the door. And then if, I'm going to go one at a time. And when I get 2 yeses, especially if I've gotten declined a couple of times, I'll take those 2 and I'll start doing these tricks to build my credit with those. And then 6 months later, maybe then I'll try applying for the Costco card again. But you don't want to apply for too many of them at once, because that will hurt your credit score. And getting rejected by a bunch of them at once will hurt your credit score.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So the next slide, number 7, is going to look at installment loans versus revolving accounts. So it's important to understand the difference, because they are very distinct components of your credit score, and they really they tell us a very different story, and they have very different impacts. So installment loans generally carry a starting balance that is repaid over time with a fixed number of payments. Think mortgage. Your mortgage is a 20 or 30-year amortized loan. It starts with a certain balance. It has amortization and interest over specific time with a specific number of payments. Yes, it can have a balloon at the end or whatever. That doesn't affect the definition, because it still has a specific starting balance and it gets repaid over time with a fixed number of payments. Car loans are the same. Student loans are the same. Federal and private loans both fall into that category. Now, installment loans are all treated the same way when calculating your credit score. Revolving accounts are credit cards or lines of credit with varying balances and monthly amounts due. So a revolving account does not have a specific starting balance. Just like I was telling you, the line of credit that my bank offered me, I have, they're willing to give me an available credit of $250,000, but I don't owe them $250,000 because I have not taken that loan. I have only had the availability of that loan. So, right, it's just like a credit card. If I have a $15,000 limit on my credit card or a $3,000 limit on my credit card, that doesn't mean that I owe them $15,000 or $3,000. I haven't used that credit. It's just available to me. Okay, so revolving accounts are accounts that have an available limit that you have access to, but the balances are always varied because it depends upon how much you use at any given time. And of course, therefore, the monthly amounts due are always varied. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, we have another question from the in-person audience. Go ahead, thanks. It's really going to help more with interest, and the only way that it helps with your credit score is it will impact that credit utilization rate. So it's not quite the same. It's a little bit less of an impact, but it does have an impact. So yeah, your credit utilization is normally on the revolving accounts, but how much credit you're using. So let's look at it this way. We're going to get to a slide pretty soon on income to debt ratio or debt to income ratio. That's where the utilization on the installment contracts is really going to come in. Okay. No, that's fine. I love the enthusiasm. So now we're going to talk about your income. Your income does not affect your credit score at all. Your income is an important factor for lenders when they're making credit decisions, but it does not affect your credit score. Okay, so just to bear in mind that it doesn't matter if right now you're not making money and you're not eligible for that mortgage that you want, or whatever credit that you may ultimately need. Now is the time to start building your credit score so that when and if you are making more money and you maybe want to obtain a higher credit for something like a mortgage. I mean, that's really mortgages are usually the biggest thing that people are looking to build their credit score to obtain good rates on a mortgage, right? So once you get there, if your credit score has been non-existent because you weren't making much money and you thought, oh, I better not touch a credit card, right? Well, you're hurting yourself because once you are making money and they look at your income because they're going to make a determination there about whether or not to lend you money, you're going to have income, but you're going to have a bad credit score. So you want to build the credit score so that when your income is at a level for the lending that you want to get, your credit score is right there with it. So lenders will measure your ability to pay your bills and whether you pay your bills on time. That's your capacity and your credit risk, right? That combined is going to be what they call your credit worthiness. And so that's what they use to make decisions about lending you money. And again, so we're gonna look at I'm going to skip to the next slide, actually, and we're going to talk about that debt to income ratio. So your debt to income ratio. There are two types of debt to income ratio that lenders evaluate: the front end ratio and the back end ratio. The front end ratio looks at your housing and shows what percentage of your income goes toward your housing expenses, your mortgage, your property taxes, taxes, homeowners insurance, association fees, rent, whatever that is. Okay. The back end ratio is how much income is needed to cover all of your monthly debt obligations. Now that includes your mortgage and housing expenses, plus credit cards, auto loans, child support, student loans, any other debts like that. Your standard living expenses, such as utilities and groceries, are not included. Why is that? They're not fixed. They are always variable. You can always change them. So when the lender looks at your debt to income ratio, they're only going to look at the things that you can't change, or at least you can't change easily, right? So the things that are fixed monthly expenses are the ones that are really going to impact you. So lenders look ideally at, hold your seat, everyone, because this blows most people away. They're looking for a 28% or less on that front end ratio. Now, when I was growing up, and every time I tell people this, they look at me like, what? But I always remember my parents. My parents were, immigrants from South America, and they came here with nothing in a suitcase, and they built a life for us, and they always had this 25% rule. And their rule was that the roof over our head was 25% of the budget or less. And if you look at it, that's consistent still with what lenders actually look for. They look at 28% or less on your front end ratio. Now, most people get caught in the trap of wanting, bigger, better, and they get the lending for it. You get offered a mortgage or an apartment or something, and you want to live in a certain area. But if your goal is to build your credit score to be as good as possible, to have some ultimate investment in the future, then live a little leaner now. That's basically the rule, okay? Because if your mortgage and other housing expenses that are fixed monthly expenses are 35 or 40%, which for most people are in the 40% range these days, that hurts your credit score every single month, okay? So if you're trying to build, try to reduce those fixed expenses on the front end to be 28% or less. The ideal back end ratio is 36% or less. So when you're thinking about how much credit to use on your credit cards or your auto loan, remember that you're looking at, about 8% over your housing expense as an ideal place to be for your back end, your back end income to debt ratio. So any questions about that, about utilizing in that regard? Okay. So and I hope this is helping, with the prior questions to understand how this works. And if it's not, we can go over more questions at the end too. So how do you determine your front and back end ratio? I think we kind of already talked about that, right? Looking at those balances. Now, achieving the higher credit score, again, we're going to talk about the income to debt ratio, paying your bills on time. There is one school of thought that says, to sort of take a break from credit card use for 3 or 6 months. The reason for that is very simple. All of this that we're talking about is a mindset shift. You are going to more easily be able to restart and rethink how you utilize credit if you take a break from it. Okay. So that's really not something that in and of itself directly impacts, an improvement in your credit score. So taking a break from using credit cards is just to give you the opportunity to sort of, just reset. Okay. If you don't need to do that, it's fine, but we think it's a healthy exercise. So that's why we recommend that. You can trade in your vehicle for one with some reduced financing, lower or no payments. Sometimes that's a good way to just sort of adjust. Resume any payments on loans that are in forbearance, including your mortgage and student loan. Everybody thinks that having a loan in forbearance is so great because it gives you a break, but long term, it really is not that great, and it can be very harmful. It increases the amount of the debt because forbearance does not stop interest. And there's also other fees oftentimes associated with forbearances. So it increases the total amount of debt, right? And then what's that going to do to your debt to income ratio and your credit utilization, right? All of a sudden, now you're looking at, you come out of your forbearance and you're starting to make your payments again, but your total debt is substantially higher. And that's not good. That's not, it might have given you a little bit of breathing space, but it's choking you on the back end. So we really don't recommend that. And the other reason we don't recommend it is also because very often people get trapped with a forbearance because they don't realize that when they come out of it, the full amount that accrued during the forbearance period becomes due when they come out of the forbearance. So people think that a forbearance is a deferral, and it's not. If you get a deferral on your mortgage, then that's going to be, those payments are going to be pushed to the back end of the loan, or otherwise re-amortized into the loan. Okay. That's not how it works with a forbearance. If you get a 4-month forbearance on your mortgage in January, right? Then January, February, March, April, yay, I don't have to pay my mortgage. But guess what? In May, you owe 5 payments because you owe January, February, March, April, and now May. And that's all due in May. So you really have to very strategically and carefully use and understand how forbearances work. Again, as we discussed before, request credit limit increases to improve your credit utilization ratio. Open new credit cards with low or 0% interest rate if at all possibly available. And if those, great terms are not available, then that's fine. Get a little bit of credit now, utilize it until you can grow to that. The other thing that we do recommend is using credit tools to keep track of your credit goals. Now, what that means is, maybe signing up to a monthly Credit Karma or one of those, right? Those will help you to keep your eye on your credit utilization. Keep your eye on your score. You don't have to. They are an investment most of the time. Some of them have, available free platforms. That's what I use. And Credit Karma is always trying to entice me into, buying things or buying their monthly, fee-based program. You don't need any of that. So, I say just get the free platform to keep your eye on things. And that works really well. Now, we do have a little bit of time left, so I want to talk about some next level items that you can put into place if you really want to build your credit score. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can increase your credit and investment potential by using business credit. Now, this is really a more complex program. You can pick a separate business entity, create the business entity. You really should work with professionals to do this. But if you can create a professional business and have a good name for it, an LLC that's completely separate from you, make sure you have the correct tax numbers for the federal and state government. When you do that and you build credit with a business concern, that business credibility can oftentimes be utilized to have credit without increasing your credit utilization and without throwing off your personal debt to income ratio. So if you want to learn more about that, give our office a call. We'll talk about helping you set up a program, about exactly how that can work. If you're ready for that next step, but that's next level, right? And first we want to build your personal credit score. And once you have the right habits to make that work, then we're going to talk about this, building a business credit score, which can do a ton for you. The other things that we can also talk about on a personal level that are a little bit more complex when you're talking about perfecting your personal credit is things like helping you to get bad information off your credit report, helping you to add good information to your credit report. We've talked about practicing good credit, paying on time, and all those things. But there's some other more nuanced things that you can do if you're done with all of those basics, right? And you want to get to the next level. Deleting bad information. That's usually a letter writing campaign, basically. Okay. One thing I'm going to tell you is I never want you to go online to dispute something on your credit report. Okay. We have specific letter writing campaigns that will help you to get bad or incorrect items off of your credit report. If you do it online, you go into their online system and a bot will determine whether or not you should have a certain item removed from your credit report. They have specific metrics and you go into the system and the bot is usually going to determine that it is not incorrect and they're going to reject your request. And once you get that rejection, it's really hard to reverse it. So what you want to do is you want to, if you have something that is incorrect on your credit report, you're going to write a letter to them. And, we have some templates. We can help you out with that. But you want to, do a friendly letter. You don't want to be antagonistic. You don't want to be critical, right? You want to write a letter saying, hey, there is this specific item on my credit report that is wrong. Maybe there's somebody else's name or an address that you never used. And you can just put those, this is what's wrong on my credit score. And I really appreciate if this could just be taken off. You want to avoid oversighting statutes because they oftentimes will trigger a frivolous letter to be tagged. And you want to remember the reason you want to write a letter is because a letter is actually going to have to be opened and read by a human being. And once that happens, you have a much better chance of a sympathetic person not being too aggressive and saying, oh yeah, that looks wrong. Well, take it off. And then you'll get a letter back clearing up those items that were wrong. The other thing that you can do is if there's information that maybe is not actually incorrect, but it's unverified or it's not particularly helpful. Like if, for example, let's say you've moved around a lot in the past, 10 years or something, and you want to get some old addresses off because honestly, having a whole bunch of old addresses does not help your credit score, right? So you want to just get it taken off. You can do the same kind of letter writing to ask them to remove those unverified entries on your credit report. And once that's cleaned up, it actually improves your credit score and makes you look more credit worthy because right, wrong, or indifferent, the lenders don't like people who have, any showing of what they consider instability. So if you had to move around a lot because your job, which was very stable, required you to move around a lot, they're going to think that that made you look less stable. So get those entries off. And it's, a simple letter writing campaign. Does it take time? Yes. It has to be, it does take time. It does have to be done correctly. It does have to be done using a complimentary and friendly approach. But it's not hard. It's just a question of knowing what you're doing. And so, these are just some, basic tips that will help you achieve a higher credit score. We hope that this information was useful. There's definitely more information available, and we can work with you on the specifics of your goals and achieving your higher credit score. And speaking of which, don't forget to stay tuned for next month as we talk about goal setting, because that's a huge component of that mindset that's going to get you to the credit score, credit worthiness, and financial healthy life that you are looking for. We really hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm just going to put it out if anybody else has any questions before we close. Do we have any questions from the in-person audience? Okay, and I don't see any questions from our online participants. I'm just going to close out of the screen share so I can make sure before. Okay. So I don't see any other questions from our online participants. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a lot. And if you do have any questions after you think through these different tips, please feel free to give us a call. And again, don't forget to stay tuned for our December workshop, which will be our workshop on goal setting. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.